I can. It won't be pretty, but I can.
All right. Does anyone have anything for the prayer list? I already updated mine. Brian, her child didn't make it. Oh. So they thought it was going good. Taking off the ventilator, but
Yeah. Sorry to hear about that, brother. We got the 3 elders. Keep the eldership in your prayers in general, but 3 new elders. I saw Hunter. Hannah's doing way better at the wedding yesterday. She was running around, jumping and drop kicking everything. I think she's doing better now. She had like an ear infection or something.
Oh.
And
Well, that's not why we put them on the board.
okay.
They lost their baby.
I didn't know that.
That's why they were on there.
But
I mean, Hannah, I'm glad she's doing better.
I miss her.
Yeah.
she's not daughter right there. Yeah, she's bonus. Thank you.
But if you think that they're doing okay now, you can take them off if they seem to be doing better.
The Morris family, you have to take this on them?
I think they're home.
Yeah, they've been home for a while.
No, they're good.
Recovery's going well.
Keep them on the board still for recovery. Y'all know what that says. Don't judge me.
Mm.
You can read it.
It's an arrow that says recovery. It's a little arrow down.
I'm sorry.
You should be a doctor.
I'm gonna count it. I'm close.
That's so close.
Now we know we can check your work, you know. They're just like, I don't know. Yeah, sure, that's right.
I have Excel.
All right, I'm just going to read some of the ones that aren't on here.
Okay.
You don't have to write these down there in the bulletin. Michael Burkowski, Bethke's on there. Steve McMunn, Stephanie Thuray, and Maxine Wilson.
With Steve McMullen, is his address in there, Wolf? Where he is located? Anyway, he needs cards.
Trustville Rehabilitation.
Dumb.
He needs
We should be
he
praying
needs
for
cards.
the
Anything.
kids.
Brandon.
Rhonda Brandon.
Steve McMullen. He needs cards. Any kind of encouragement.
I don't know if I spelled that right.
Any we can do.
2 N's at the end.
Okay, that's what I was wondering. And Rhonda and Brandon, they got married yesterday, so.
And for Steve, put Trustful Rehabilitation in the best way you
Just
can.
put rehab.
Yeah, Trustful Rehab. T-Ville Rehab.
Alright. What's Brandon's last name?
Casio.
No, the one that got married yesterday.
Wagner's what they were saying.
Wagner.
That's what I've never asked him for it. Yeah, really good.
All right, and a couple other things. Breakfast for dinner with the bunny is March 31st at 6 p.m. We need volunteers for registration, kitchen, mingling, and pictures. Sign the list in the foyer if you can help. The Easter egg hunt, that's a lot of people in this class are affected by that, is April 2nd after the 10:30 service. And we need plastic eggs filled with candy. Place them in the basket in the foyer. All right. Corey, can you start us off with prayer?
Almighty Father, Lord, we thank you for allowing us to come together today to worship you, to dive into your word. We pray that we can discern new things from your word that'll affect us, that'll improve the way that our relationship is with you. It'll improve our relationship with those outside of here, so that we can hopefully have an impact in this world through you. Lord, we pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.
All right. We are doing Esther chapter 8 today. So I'm going to start by reading Acts chapter 16, verses 13 through 15. And on the Sabbath day we went outside the gate to the riverside, where we supposed there was a place of prayer. And we sat down and spoke to the women who had come together. One who heard us was a woman named Lydia, from the city of Thyatira, a seller of purple goods, who was a worshiper of God. The Lord opened her heart to pay attention to what was said by Paul. And after she was baptized, and her household as well, she urged us, saying, "If you have judged me faithful, to be faithful to the Lord, come to my house and stay." And she prevailed upon us. So, what does that have to do with Esther? Not really anything. But in that reading, we learn about Lydia and purple. So, when I was, years ago, in the old Roebuck building, we had a young marrieds class, and then at some point, even the students in the class were getting up close to 50. Not the teachers like Skip, me, Sam, not like the people in the class were getting close. So we were like, okay, this is not young married anymore. So we broke apart from that and had a new class called Adult Number 1. So that class, Rick Glass was the teacher. And when we talked about Lydia, we talked about she was a seller of purple, and what did you have to do to get purple? Because it was a special color, it was for royals and really expensive. So anciently, the production of this type of dye was a long and laborious task. The liquid used to create it came from a tiny Mediterranean sea snail gland. Each snail produced only a single drop of the needed fluid. To produce 1 pound of dye during the ancient Roman Empire times took acquiring 4 million mollusks. So, just as kind of an example of that dye and the process, Rick brought calamari one Sunday. I don't remember everything he said that day, but even to this day, I remember that object lesson. So I'm going to try something similar. Not quite to that level. And I certainly didn't bake anything. So I don't know if anyone pays attention to the dates. Does anyone know what March 6th and 7th was this past week? Purim. We just passed it. So the evening of March 6th to the evening of March 7th. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about that. A few of the ways that Purim is typically celebrated is reading of the Megillah, which is Esther, and also the story of Amalek's attack on the Israelites in the wilderness from Exodus. They have noisemakers that, so while they're reading Esther, they make noise every time Haman's name is mentioned. So they dress up in costumes. Sometimes non-Jews compare Purim to Jewish Halloween or Jewish Mardi Gras. But really it's a mask to conceal identity, kind of like Mordecai instructed Esther. It's a festive holiday meal. There's drinking and merrymaking, and one thing says, a person is obligated to become so intoxicated on Purim that he does not know the difference between cursed as Haman and blessed as Mordecai.
Sarah said that. She had the client at the bank who brought it up. She said, I'm going to do Purim. I was like, what? Sarah said that.
There's also a poem, and I'm just going to read through this. The Jews of Susa beamed with joy when they beheld Mordecai robed in royal blue. You, God, have always been our deliverance, our hope in every generation. Those who place their hope in you will never be ashamed. Those who trust in you will never be disgraced. Cursed be Haman, who sought to destroy us. Blessed be Mordecai, the Jew. Cursed be Zeresh, the wife of Haman. Blessed be Esther, our protector. And may Carvana also be remembered for good. And you probably aren't really thinking much about Carvana. but if we actually mentioned him last week. But we call him in chapter 7, verse 9, Harbona. So he's the one that said, hey, look, there's gallows. Hang him on it. So that's why the Jews celebrate Harbona. And they say to each other, Purim Samaru. Happy holiday Purim. All right, the last thing that I skipped over is they eat 3-cornered filled pastries called Hamantash.
That's hilarious.
So
That's what
I
they
have
said on the picture.
round pastries to celebrate Purim. For anyone that cares, I didn't touch any of this with my hands. Some people don't care, but
Does it have dairy in it?
I got you.
Oh. Yep, sure does. You want it?
No, hey,
Okay.
You said, hey,
The rules go,
Share.
Jeffrey. Stop tempting me.
Or you asked for it.
Tempter, thank you.
I wonder what people do with their allergies at the beginning of the holidays where they have to make it.
They don't get to have fun.
Yeah.
obviously.
You don't get to
There's
celebrate.
Couples, some people just deal with it.
You just
Yeah.
put it.
Yeah, I wonder if we just like have to-
Take the concept.
Every once
Well,
in a while,
maybe
they
they get drunk.
Except have
Maybe
a bad
they
day.
just get
Yeah,
drunk.
that's right. That's right. Yeah.
Just everyone-
There's a whole cheesecake to myself.
all right. So everyone can remember to celebrate Purim. I do have the ingredients if anyone wants to check. It's cherry,
Oh, cherry.
if you're concerned.
Okay. I was just curious.
How dare you? Where's the strawberry?
You don't want to fruit.
So hopefully this will be something that you can remember when you're thinking about Esther. Kind of chapter 9, but Purim was last week. So, and we've talked about it before that Purim means lots, and it's a lot of the time we think about it being the lots that Haman cast in chapter 3, verse 7. But I read something where the Jews don't really like thinking about it, like we're celebrating this holiday in memory of the plan to destroy us. So, and they're thinking they don't believe in lots anyway, like the chance of throwing lots. We don't believe that either. I mean, so what they like to say is that the lots, the chance that was taken was Esther going before the king.
That's kind of similar to like Acts. I think Acts 1, they cast the lots for the next, they'll replace Judas. They didn't cast it as a chance, they cast it as a God's divine will.
Mm-hmm. All right. So let's get on to chapter 8. Okay. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna just kind of go either verse or a couple of verse by verse. And we're going to look at two things throughout chapter 8. We're going to look in chapter 8 and compare the Jews against Haman's letter versus Haman's letter against the Jews. So, Alex, can you read 1 and 2?
On that day, King Ahasuerus gave to Queen Esther the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews, and Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told what he was told to her, or what he was to her. And the king took off his signet ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai, and Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman.
All right. So, thinking about that, I want to look back at chapter 2, verse 10, where it says, Esther had not revealed her people or family, for Mordecai had charged her not to reveal it.
2:10.
2:10.
Esther had not revealed her people or family, for Mordecai had charged her not to reveal it.
Okay. So, it went from concern about who she was to she was comfortable and explained about Mordecai being related to her, and obviously explained she had already had explained that she was a Jew. The other thing is chapter 3, verse 1. After these things, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, and advanced him and set him above all the princes who were with him. So that's similar to back in chapter 8, where Mordecai is set in the same position. In verse 2, in reference to the signet ring, I look back at chapter 3, verse 10. So the king took his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. And then also in reference to how Esther was now in charge of all of Haman's property. Look back at chapter 5, verse 11. Then Haman told them of his great riches, the multitude of his children, everything in which the king had promoted him, and how he had advanced him above the officials and servants of the king. All right. Evan, we do 3 and 4.
And Esther spoke again to the king. She fell at his feet and wept and pleaded with him to avert the evil plan of Haman the Agagite and the plot that he had devised against the Jews. When the king held out the golden scepter to Esther, Esther rose and stood before the king. And she said, If it please the king, and if I have found favor in his sight, and if the thing seems right before the king, I am pleasing in his eyes, that an order be written to revoke the letter devised by Haman the Agagite, the son of Haman, which he wrote to destroy the Jews.
Okay.
That's okay.
All right. So, in comparison, so here we're talking about something we have to counteract what Haman had done. So let's look at I'm going to read chapter 3, verse 8 and 9. Then Haman said to King Ahasuerus, There are certain people scattered and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from all other people's. They do not keep the king's laws. Therefore it is not fitting for the king to let them remain. If it pleases the king, let a decree be written that they be destroyed. I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who do the work, to bring it into the king's treasuries. And also, so here we also read in verse 4 that Esther again went into the king, and he had to hold out the golden scepter. So again, she went into the king unbidden. I'm sure she was more comfortable at this point, but she still had to go in, and she had to hold up the golden scepter. So, and that brings us back to chapter 5, verse 2 through 4. So it was when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court that she found favor in his sight, and the king held to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. Then Esther went near and touched the top of the scepter. The king said to her, What do you wish, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given to you up to half the kingdom. So Esther said, "If it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come today to the banquet that I have prepared for him." All right. Verse 5. We'll look back at 3, verse 13. "And letters were sent by couriers into all the king's provinces to destroy, to kill, to annihilate all the Jews, both young and old, little children and women, in one day, on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and to plunder their possessions." And also, chapter 2, verse 17. This is relating to, she asked, "If I've found favor in your sight, and if it seems right to the king, if I'm pleasing in his eyes." So in chapter 2:17, "The king loved Esther more than all the other women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins. So he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti." One of the things that Kaufman said was she felt comfortable with her favor that she had with the king. Like she knew that he liked her, so he's willing to do what she asked. All right. Also, chapter 4, verse 14. So this is relating to verse 6, when she's talking about how can I endure the evil that will come to my people, destruction of my countrymen. So back in 4:14, Mordecai says, "For if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this." So she's understanding the part that she had, or she's willing to be a part of the plan. At this point, she was worried before. Now she's more confident, but still is seeking to do what needs to be done to protect her people. Okay. Jeffrey, you read 7 and 8.
So King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther and to Mordecai the Jew, "Behold, I have given the house of Haman to Esther, and him they have hung on the gallows because he had stretched out his hands against the Jews. Now you write to the Jews as you see fit in the king's name, and seal it with the king's signet ring. For a decree which is written in the name of the king and sealed with the king's signet ring may not be revoked."
Okay. So, verse 7, one thing that I thought was interesting was Ahasuerus, the king, says that he was killed because he tried to lay his hands on the Jews. So, doesn't seem exactly like what really happened, but he's turning it in a way. Yeah.
I have a question. How come my Bible has a different name for the king? Or am I just...
The Xerxes?
Yeah, Xerxes? Yeah.
Same person. Different translation.
Yeah. I've got that in my translations as well.
Xerxes is all the same.
Now, why he has two different names,
Okay.
that I don't know.
Because he's special. You know, a lot of
Medo-Persian.
a lot of kings and officials have multiple titles and names. So.
It's like today, the King of England could have chosen a different name instead of Charles. That's one of the things we're like, will he keep Charles or will he do another name? So history would tell him my two names.
Okay. This is like a Xerxes and then what is it?
Artaxerxes.
Artaxerxes.
Yeah.
It's like very similar.
Wait, is this the same one from 300?
Yes.
Yes.
I like that.
Yeah, so while he's out fighting, Esther might be sitting back home. I don't know the timeline.
Yeah, it was a Vashti.
It's not the same guy. It's not the same guy.
Oh.
Xerxes and Xerxes is not the same?
No, there were
Xerxes
several
was
kings
Xerxes.
that had Xerxes in their name,
Oh.
but the 300 occurred before the time of
Like the
Esther.
Pope.
Mm.
John Paul the First.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, well.
But it's
We can
because-
It would be cool.
It could be like a family
Cool
name.
for a
though.
second.
So I'm thinking like a family name,
Yeah.
and then you have
It's like, no, that was
this guy be.
Yeah.
Well, on verse 7, I mean, it seems that the only zeal that King Ahasuerus had for protecting the Jews came from Esther. You know, like, I mean, I think we were talking about it last time, and it appears that there definitely was a strong motivation on his part to protect Esther, and that he hated the idea of someone threatening her, and consequentially, her people. But
Yeah.
clearly, initially, like, Haman was like, there are these bad people who just don't do what you want.
Yeah.
And he was like, all right, just kill them all.
I'm not even going to check up on who that is.
Right, right.
Go with it.
Yeah, but now his zeal is for the Jews as well. You know, but I think he his mention of Mordecai as well. I think that also is another like point of, hey, you know what? These Jews are pretty good people. You know, I like these Jews guys. You know,
Well,
I like her. You saved my life.
yeah, exactly. Right, exactly. It's like, yeah, these Jews are pretty cool.
Two out of all the people.
Exactly.
Really cool.
Yeah.
It's like the only ones he's really had interactions with.
Yeah.
So he's like,
Or
Like,
he probably had
oh,
interactions with
Jews
lots of
now.
them. He just didn't know they were Jews.
yeah, didn't know she was from the time.
Yeah. He just doesn't pay attention. And I love how he's also just like giving his ring out again. Didn't I get him in trouble before? Like, sorry, keep that under lock and key, please.
Yeah.
Guys.
I'm
You
sure
they
there's-
get you in trouble.
I'm sure there's part of it too, where like even if he wouldn't really care that much, like it's a big deal to her. So it's like,
Yeah.
All right, so just in relating to verse 7, I'll read chapter 5:14. Then his wife Zeresh and his friends said to him, let a gallows be made 50 cubits high, and in the morning suggest to the king that Mordecai be hanged on it. Then go merrily with the king to the banquet. So, just a short time ago, Haman was thinking things were going great. All right, verse 8. I want to look at a few things. One is chapter 3, verse 11. The king said to Haman, the money and the people are given to you. Do with them as seems good to you. And also 12. The king's scribes were called on the 13th day of the first month, and a decree was written according to all that Haman commanded, to the king's satraps, to the governors who were over each province, to the officials of all people, to every province according to its script, and to every people in their language. In the name of King Ahasuerus it was written and sealed with the king's signet ring. I want to read one other verse, back in chapter 1. If I can turn to it. Someone can read 119, because I can't turn to it.
Therefore, if it pleases the king, let him issue a royal decree, and let it be written in the laws of Persia and Media, which cannot be repealed, that Vashti is never again to enter the presence of King Xerxes. And also let the king give her a royal position to someone else who is better than she.
Okay, so looking back in chapter 8, verse 8, we see that the king's signet ring, for whatever is written in the king's name and sealed with the king's signet ring, no one can revoke. Before that verse, did we know those two things were connected? Nope. We had seen the law of the Medes and Persians that cannot be revoked, and we'd seen sealing with the signet ring. Chapter 8, verse 8 connects those two. And so we know back in chapter 1, there was a law and a signet ring. Chapter 3, there was a law and a signet ring. That it just wasn't mentioned in those two chapters. Chapter 8, verse 8 explains that those go together. And also, we know from Daniel chapter 6. Daniel 6. I'll read verse 8 and then 12. Now, O king, establish the injunction and sign the document so that it cannot be changed according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be revoked. And then verse 12. They came near and said before the king concerning the injunction, O king, did you not sign an injunction that anyone who makes petition to any god or man within 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions? The king answered and said, the thing stands fast according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be revoked. So we have talked in multiple chapters about the law of the Medes and Persians, and that cannot be revoked. And I still have not been able to find any origin for it. I don't know if Brandon, if you've done a deep dive and found anything, but the origin of why they ever started this. The law of the Medes and Persians that cannot be revoked. I couldn't find.
It goes back to Cyrus. They had a very stringent legal system. I forgot the name of the fact that they found, but it was one of the first cultures that had a hardcore legal system in a sense. And so, because the king was over all the providences like that, it was a way to quell an immediate quelling. It's like if you're having bickering between the providences, king just ended it.
Yeah, one of the things that I read was that this, I mean, we can tell just by thinking about it, this is taking power out of the king's hands. So it's like how nobles said, all right, the drunken king is wanting to make a change to something he already stamped. No, he can't do it.
They did that kind of first. I think it was Cadmius who took over after his brother. Cadmius got jealous of his son, I think, and sent his son off to die in a war. So that's kind of like when the nobles started taking more power for themselves. I think that was the king, the time that was going on. But.
Yeah, I mean, we've said it before. It's just like, why would the king? Why would he do it?
I think it's interesting you compare it to our system. You know, the Constitution has amendments, and what's fascinating to me about the Constitution is that one amendment can completely undo another amendment. For example, there was an amendment that prohibited the consumption of alcohol, nationally, and the amendment that immediately followed after that completely undid. And it's so it's part of the Constitution that that nationally no one can drink alcohol. It's also part of the Constitution that everyone can drink alcohol across the nation. So it's it's crazy how we have a system where an amendment can completely undo part of what's in the Constitution actually, versus their system was similar, but they had to do more like this. As we'll see, this is more like a way around what's established as opposed to fully revoking what's established.
The thing too is, again, they also like how other cultures later, and in the Roman areas and the Babylonian Empire pursuing it, they looked at the king as a god, so you couldn't usurp a previous god. It was like a boundaries thing. So that's why they also were like, once a decree is made, it's done. It wasn't just for quelling, but also for godly.
He didn't make a mistake when he said it.
It's like saying, oh, the previous god was wrong. It's like, oh, this is awkward now because our whole system is built on that.
Right.
And hopefully, if they're a wise God, they'll think about their decisions before they make them, because once they're made, they can't be undone.
Right.
Rather than being willy-nilly, I'll make this law and just undo it later.
Well, that's how Daniel got thrown in the lion's den.
Yeah.
Because the law was made, and so oops, well, I can't back out now.
Yeah.
And this is something else that may not be true, but Daniel is referred to, the king is Darius the Mede, and we don't know who that is, but it might be Darius the Great. And if it is Darius the Great, that's Xerxes' dad. So just some possible history, not for sure. All right, so we can't get rid of the decree, so we have to put a decree on top of it. The decree. So, Joseph, we got Esther 8. Can you read 9 and 10?
The king's scribes were summoned at the time in the 3rd month, which is the month of Saturn, and the 23rd day. And the edict managed according to the Jews, to the scribes and the governors of the officials of the previous from India and to Ethiopia. 127th province. To each province is its own script, and each people in their own language. And also to the Jews their script and their language. And he wrote in the name of the king Esther, and sealed it with the king's signet ring. Then he sent to the letters that mounted the carriers riding and swift horses, and they were used in the king's service. Bread from the royal stud.
Okay. So this gives a timeline of when we are. We don't know all of the names of the months, but the name Sivan is a Babylonian name, the 3rd month being sacred to the moon god. It corresponded to our May-June. So the date we're talking about is June 25th, 474. So that gave, that was a little over 2 months after the first decree. And so the Jews still had 8 months to prepare their defenses. Go back to 3 again and read verses 14 and 15. A copy of the document was to be issued as a law in every province, being published for all people, that they should be ready for that day. The couriers were sent out, hastened by the king's command, and the decree was proclaimed in Shushan, the citadel. So the king and Haman sat down to drink, for the city of Shushan was perplexed. So, very similar from the first decree to the second decree. We gotta get this taken care of fast. And if you look back in chapter 1, I won't go there, but it goes into the details of how many provinces and that kind of thing. So that, let's see. All right, Hunter, if you'll read 11 and 12.
In them the king granted the Jews who were in each and every city the right to assemble and defend their lives, to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate the entire army of the people or province which might attack them, including children and women, and to plunder their spoil. On one day in all the provinces the king highest 13th day of the 12th month. This is the month of Adar. 13, you said?
That's good. So looking back at 3:13, the letters were sent by couriers into all the king's provinces to destroy, to kill, to annihilate all the Jews, both young and old, little children and women, in one day, on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. So the decree is on the same day. So the original decree is they were to kill the Jews on that day, and now the Jews can protect themselves on that day. The other thing is, let's jump ahead to chapter 9, verse 15. And the Jews who were in Shushan gathered together again on the 14th day of the month of Adar, and killed 300 men at Shushan, but they did not lay a hand on the plunder. So, according to the king's edict, they are allowed to plunder their enemies, but they did not do that. All right. Aaron, can you read 13 to the end?
A copy of what was written was to be issued as a decree in every province, being publicly displayed to all peoples, and the Jews were to be ready on that day to take vengeance on their enemies. So the couriers, mounted on their swift horses that were used in the king's service, rode out hurriedly, urged by the king's command, and the decree was issued in Susa, the citadel. And then Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal robes of blue and white, with a golden crown and a robe of fine linen and purple, and the city of Susa shouted and rejoiced. The Jews had light and gladness and joy and honor, and in every province and in every city, wherever the king's command and his edict reached, there was gladness and joy among the Jews, a feast and a holiday. And many from the peoples of the country declared themselves Jews, for fear of the Jews had fallen on them.
All right, Stan, if you'll read just as the last comparison, read chapter 4, 1 through 3.
4, 1 through 3. When Mordecai learned all that was done, Mordecai tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the midst of the city and cried out with a loud and bitter cry. He went up to the entrance of the king's gate, for no one was allowed to enter the king's gate clothed in sackcloth. And in every province, wherever the king's command and his decree reached, there was a great mourning among the Jews, with fasting and weeping and lamenting, and many of them lay in sackcloth and ashes.
All right, so the Jews have come a long way from chapter 4, when they're laying in sackcloth and mourning. Now they're so, things are going so well that they're having, evangelism. People are becoming Jews, and just because of this. And chapter 9 gets into a lot of the details we talked about at the beginning with the Purim celebration and the protection going on during that.
So the Septuagint expands on more on what the king says. There's something funny when I was reading it. What
Okay.
it says, for as Haman, a Macedonian, the son of Hammedatha, in reality an alien from the blood of the Persians, differing wildly from our course of government, having been hospitably entertained by us, obtained a large share of our universal kindness, as to be called our father, and to continue the person next to the royal throne, reverence of all. He, however, overcame by pride, endeavored to deprive us of our dominion in our life, having high destruction, both Mordecai, our deliverer, and perpetual benefactor, and Esther the blameless. So,
yes.
I don't know if that's why I was actually in there, but it's kind of
one thing about this chapter and the other chapter, like in verse 9 it says the king's scribes.
Mm-hmm.
So there's some embellishing in these letters. I'm sure Mordecai got the full thing and said, stamped. But
yeah, it goes on. It's a little bit worse, but I think it's hilarious that has some truth to it. He's like, Haman was betraying us all. Remember that. It's not my fault.
I know we need to wrap up, but one last quick comment. The Jews, ever since Exodus 12, there was within the law an allowance for those who were not Jews to become Jews. If they would circumcise themselves, the males, and they would follow the old law, they would be full-on Jews. And that's unique amongst ancient cultures. A lot of times, if you were not an Egyptian, if you were not whatever else, you couldn't just be like, well, I'll just become one of y'all. The Jews had a part of their law was that non-Jews could become Jews, and I think that's just such a unique blessing, and almost it's like a precursor to Christianity. Anybody of any nationality become a Christian. And so anyway, it's just unique, and it's kind of cool to see how God brought more people into His chosen fold through this wonderful, amazing time in history. So, pretty incredible.
That goes back also to Abraham too, because Abraham had it first, and they're sojourners. They don't have I know we need to wrap up, but going to what you were saying, the Egyptians had their land, every place has their land, but Abraham and his children never had a land until God gave it. So It makes sense why God would say, yeah, there's a way to become a follower.
Yeah, become a Jew. Yeah.
All right, Alex, can you close this prayer?
Yes, sir. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this time that we've had this morning to dig a little deeper in the Book of Esther and just see her example in Mordecai's bravery throughout all this. And we pray that anything that we learned this morning, that we just hold on to, that we can spread the word to other people as we go out into our regular lives, and just help us to strengthen each other as we try to spread your word. We thank you for, we just thank you for your word and Jesus and what He's done for us and down on the cross for our sins. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen.